You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Let's kick off the show with Front Page, where we get you caught up on the news that matters for us here in the Pacific Northwest. And joining me once again for Front Page, I just found out that he orders special hats to fit over that big brain. David Kroman with the Seattle Times. Thank you so much for being here, man.
Me and my big head are happy to be here.
Hey, it takes one to know one.
Yeah,
we were just talking about how we have to order the big hats. Let's get to our top story on Front Page.
You can clap for that.
That's Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson receiving applause from an unlikely crowd, and I'm going to explain more about that in just a minute. The mayor has been making some waves with recent policy and statements, so I thought that we would sit down with, David here. You are the guy covering City Hall at the Times, and I would take advantage of that and say, let's do a lightning round on City Hall politics. Cool.
Happy to.
Okay, great. So first up, you covered this decision by the mayor that she has hit pause on the AI tool that was going to be rolled out for city employees. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting story because it gets at some of the larger concerns and tensions around what AI's role is going to be in particularly local government. So under Mayor Harrell, they had kind of kicked off this process for, quote, responsible use of AI in city government. And as a piece of that, they were going to start offering, basically, it's Microsoft Copilot. So it's something similar to ChatGPT that employees could interact with to help them do their job. They had started with a pilot program of about 500 people that were going to do this last year. The plan was to roll it out citywide in late February. And as you mentioned, Mayor Wilson put a pause on that. The thought behind this program was, there's the sort of practical piece of it, which is, people can use this program and maybe it helps them with their efficiency at work. But really the piece is that government employees are using AI and ChatGPT anyway, whether or not we want them to. And
I was going to say, David, that how do you even put that back in the bottle, right?
Exactly.
It's out there.
No, I know. There's a sort of almost harm reduction aspect to this, which is an acknowledgement that this behavior is occurring sanctioned or unsanctioned. And in local government, maybe that doesn't sound like such a big deal, but when you're talking about local government, you're talking about an entity that handles people's pretty sensitive information and has to comply with public disclosure laws. And so if people are using, say, ChatGPT unsanctioned and perhaps uploading information to that they shouldn't be, or not reporting it so that if someone like you or I, a journalist, files a records request, it's not going to be made available, that's a problem. And so the thought was, this program, we will sanction it, we will put regulations around it. Mayor Wilson comes in, though, and my understanding is basically felt a little uneasy, not unsure about what sort of work had been done around this program before she came into office. She had some urging from some unions to tap the brakes on this a little bit. The indications are that this is just a pause. It will make a return at some point. But again, I do think it kind of gets to this broader tension around, there is an if not when aspect to AI in local government. But when is it useful? When is it crossing the line? When is it harmful? When is it beneficial? It's a lot of questions that I just don't think have really been grappled with or answered. And so the reason I found this interesting was in some ways less about the program itself and more about just the fact that her administration doesn't feel like they have a strong feeling for how the city is using AI, and so wanted to slow things down.
Yeah, makes sense. Good thing is that we figured out how AI is going to affect things in all other aspects of life.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Everything else is taken care of. It's just about city government that people are a little bit on their, back foot. So we'll see what happens. What's the next with that decision? Are they giving it a timeline or when they're going to
They haven't
decide?
given it a timeline.
Okay.
So no, I don't know when we would expect a decision on that.
All right. Next story in our lightning round on City Hall and Mayor Wilson news, and that is some surprising comments that she made at the Downtown Seattle Association's annual meeting last week, where she talked about taxes and kind of acknowledged some of the criticisms that come from more of the moderate and conservative folks in the DSA. Let's take a listen to that.
But I also want to let you know that I very much appreciate that it is not ideal for our tax environment for businesses to be wildly out of step with neighboring jurisdictions. And you can clap for that. And I anticipate that we will be doing some significant reprioritization, otherwise known as cuts.
So this got a big round of applause and also some attention because a very progressive mayor, somebody who's identified as a democratic socialist, not typically the one who gets like a rousing round of applause for talking about tax policy in front of a business group like the Downtown Seattle Association. What was your read on this, David?
I think the context is important first, which is that Katie Wilson, before she was mayor, was probably the primary backer, non-elected backer of the city's, they call it the Jumpstart payroll tax. This is the tax that is put on the largest corporations in the city to fund affordable housing. Outside of elected officials, Katie Wilson was probably the primary reason that is policy today. So hearing her talk about this is significant just from that perspective. The other piece is her campaign for mayor came out of the vote to fund social housing with yet another tax on high-paying companies. She saw that and said, hey, there's this big appetite for a candidate who is going to campaign unabashedly on new progressive revenue. I'm going to get into this
handily,
race. It passed
she
easily.
kind of thought, hey, this is my moment.
Yeah, she saw that and said, I think Bruce Harrell is out of touch with the current environment and appetite for progressive taxation. I'm going to get in the race and I'm going to build my campaign around that. So to hear her say that, I think, is certainly notable compared to her campaign. On the other hand, I think we're still in this period with her as mayor where, I feel this way and I report on her. I don't know that the city knows exactly what they're going to get in her. And certainly the business community feels that way. And I would say that of anybody in the city who has been pleasantly surprised by Mayor Katie Wilson, it is the business community right now. She has made overtures to them in a way that I don't think they were expecting. She retained Police Chief Sean Barnes, which they really wanted. She has not committed to turning off CCTV cameras. She has asked her departments to basically game out 5 to 10% cuts. These are all things that the business community wanted from her. They were, of course, not particularly pleased with her calls to boycott Starbucks. But on a whole, they're feeling like, hey, we're liking what we're hearing out of her office. And, this message to the DSA certainly reinforces that.
Yeah, you mentioned CCTV cameras. I was reading Capitol Hill Seattle blog reporting on these efforts among progressives to really lobby Wilson to follow through on turning off those cameras and stopping this expansion that's been planned. Now, Wilson, since she got into office, has sort of changed her tune and said she's been listening to community members who want these cameras to go forward. Capitol Hill Seattle blog also brought forward some of this data that the Seattle Police Department has presented, arguing that there are public safety benefits to these cameras. So police, according to this data presented by SPD, are 3 times more likely to make an arrest in cases when they're working with the analysts at the Real-Time Crime Center. You mentioned again that business community folks have been more pleasantly surprised by Wilson so far. This is an issue that progressives seem to be really hammering on, saying this was something we expected from you, and now you're waffling. So what do you make of the criticism coming from the left?
Yeah, there's a petition floating out there that was started by people who worked on her campaign and helped her get her elected.
Oh, wow.
Saying, Mayor Wilson, we want you to at least slow the expansion, if not turn off these surveillance cameras more generally. So the pressure is real. I think she feels it. I think the thing about Mayor Wilson that maybe was not understood fully on the campaign trail is we're not talking about Shama Sawant here. We're not talking about an ideologue. She has always been a kind of, on the one hand this, on the other hand that type. She is progressive for sure, but most people who have direct interactions with her see that she acknowledges the other side of issues, and I think we're seeing that a lot in her time as mayor. I think a big impact on her was, frankly, that shooting at Rainier Beach High School that killed 2 students.
Yeah.
There was an announcement this week that they had made an arrest in that. But I think what happened is she was hearing from a lot of parents, African-American parents living in Rainier Valley who were saying, we don't want you to turn off these cameras. We want you to keep these cameras. We want this. And, when you
And that is something, by the way, that Bruce Harrell brought up during the campaign.
For sure.
That he felt like some of the opinions about cameras were coming from, frankly, white progressives.
Yes, exactly. And I think as mayor, it is a little harder to stick to your guns when you were looking some of these people in the face who have experienced loss and are saying, here's how we want you to proceed on public safety. And that includes more cameras. So, I I think with Mayor Wilson, she is in a phase where she's trying to kind of figure out where her efforts are best spent. Were she to try and turn off the surveillance cameras, that would be a big fight. It would be a political battle that would take up probably months of her time. I think right now she would prefer to be spending that time on shelter, for example. So I think what we're seeing in part is some reality coming to roost and a political calculation.
I'm talking with David Kroman, City Hall reporter with the Seattle Times. This is Front Page on Soundside, and we're moving on to our next story.
My goal in 6 months is that we're not in the lead story every single day.
All right, moving from City Hall to Congress, that was Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin, President Trump's pick to lead the Department of Homeland Security at a Senate confirmation hearing today. The Republican former MMA fighter was using a really decidedly more low-key tone to talk about his plans for DHS and how immigration officers would pursue enforcement under his watch if he's confirmed. You know, Kristi Noem is somebody who seemed to really relish the controversy being out in public, making these, big, fighting statements, going down to El Salvador, taking photos in front of prisoners. But Markwayne Mullin basically saying, we're going to soften our approach. This confirmation hearing is coming at a pivotal time for DHS. TSA officers are continuing to work without pay as the partial federal government shutdown stretches into its second month. Senate Democrats are blocking DHS funding over the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. SeaTac Airport has a food pantry open for TSA workers. They're working without pay. Yeah, this has happened in previous shutdowns, but it's remarkable. We've passed the 30-day mark at this point. David, what do you think? Are Americans feeling this shutdown? I mean, what are the pressure points that Democrats and Republicans in the White House are feeling at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't done any traveling, so I couldn't speak to it directly. It seems like the wait times at SeaTac are not horrible yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen the headlines around the country. Some places have really felt it, but I haven't seen that out of Seattle. Yeah,
I mean, certainly Republicans are sort of betting that the pressure points will start to show up and that there will be some leverage. They will gain some leverage over Democrats on this. I think it's worth pointing out this fight is over ICE, but ICE is well funded for quite some time, and so it is not actually affecting ICE's operations. Democrats are trying to use it to extract some concessions and changes to how ICE operates. They're also saying, hey, we're putting up this bill that would fund all these other pieces of DHS, and we could set ICE aside. The Republicans aren't biting on that. I think it's certainly interesting that they're thinking about toning down the rhetoric on this, or at least the attention. I think that probably has to do with the polling and the fact that we're heading into the midterms.
Yeah, you definitely felt that. I mean, the White House and Senate Democrats have been exchanging, negotiating, offers over how things might change at DHS. But the White House had been offering pretty basic kind of smaller changes. Like they would, offer that the officers that are doing immigration enforcement would have to have ID, but they would be allowed to still wear masks. Mm-hmm. Democrats have said the masks are a, non-starter if the masks stay. But Markwayne Mullin, interestingly, made an offer that went further than what the White House was saying today. And I'm going to play that for you right here.
I have made it very clear that judicial warrants will be used to go into houses, into place of businesses, unless we're pursuing someone that enters in that place. I have not mixed words with that, and I haven't changed my opinion about that.
So that is really big because ICE had reportedly been approving its own warrants, using these administrative warrants to enter people's homes and businesses. Markwayne Mullin saying if he is approved, that he would require a judge to sign off on warrants. And that is something that the Democrats have said is a demand before they approve funding for DHS.
Right.
So maybe we see a little bit of cracks here. I want to move on to our next story because it's a little bit more lighthearted. But, could I think for both David and I, it could spell the key to our happiness over the next, 8-9 months.
I know.
The union, we are together the whole time. We're not just teammates, we are family. This team is awesome. We are family here. That's why we play with passion, with love, because we feel the jersey, we feel our country in front of us.
That's Gino Suarez. He is, of course, our pal from the Mariners. He was just riding high last night because he was the big hero of the World Baseball Classic championship game. Team Venezuela beat Team USA 3-2 on a Suarez ninth inning double. The emotion of those Venezuelan players, absolutely incredible. I hadn't really watched the World Baseball Classic for a couple of years, but I turned on the game last night, and I'm a believer. I mean, I think that it's been going for 20 years now, and I feel like I initially dismissed it as just like, what are these, like warm-up scrimmages? But the passion and the tears on those Venezuelan players' faces when they were accepting the gold medals, I love this event. I love this tournament now, David.
Yeah, I do too. There was a quote early on from Julio Rodriguez, who he basically said, "This is more important to me than the World Series."
Wow.
Which, I think is, some Mariners fans were like maybe a little taken aback by that. I was not, though. I mean, I think it's logical. And, you've got these players. They come to the United States to pursue their dreams, and I think it's a lonely existence, and I'm sure they're homesick and they're not in their environment, and they have the opportunity to play with people all from their same country who come from similar backgrounds. There's all these systems that kind of usher these people through up to major leagues, and I'm sure a lot of them came up together and feel very close. I have to point out the poetic image of the United States playing Venezuela in the final here is sort of incredible, particularly because the U.S. had this sort of military vibe to how they were going.
Tell me more about this. You were talking to me about this before we got on air, so we got about 90 seconds left. This beef between Randy Rosarena and Cal Raleigh, it kind of stemmed from this attitude of the American players, which, this handshake that didn't happen and then turned into just back and forth in the media. What was the deal with that? Like, the USA was just like, we won't be friendly in this tournament?
Yeah, it seemed like they kind of made this collective decision to be us against the world, and they had one of the people from SEAL Team 6 who apparently killed Osama bin Laden come and speak to them beforehand. So it had this very military vibe, and then you contrast that with, the joy of the Dominican and Venezuelan teams. It was pretty stark to watch.
And the Italian teams taking espresso shots after they hit home runs.
Which they were joking about how half the players on the Italian team were from New Jersey.
Yeah. There were only 3 actually born and raised Italian players on the team. It was all like Dominic Canzone and
Vinny
other people.
Pasquantino
Yeah, there was a heritage rule.
But that's why I love these global competitions. Is people want to say that sports is not political, but when you have these countries playing against each other and an opportunity to sort of present themselves to the world, it becomes political. Maybe it's not a clear political statement, but there's the kind of history and tensions between countries comes to play, and it becomes it's a beautiful thing. I think.
It's just I love sports. Okay.
I do too.
I just love sports. And, the Mariners had the most players in this tournament of any major league team. David Kroman, so much fun doing Front Page today with you, and congrats to Venezuela. Really appreciate your time today, man.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org. Or, of course, on your favorite podcast app.